A 76-year-old woman in Ecuador was declared dead at a hospital over the weekend after a possible stroke and cardiac arrest. But during the wake, Bella Montoya was hitting from the inside of the coffin, trying to get out.
Most people fear death, but imagine waking up and realizing you'd already been declared dead. For some, that nightmare became real.
Until they got closer to me, and then I realized that Jesus.
They opened their eyes in morgues, coffins, and even during funerals while their families wept beside them. These stories are strange, emotional, and sometimes even darkly funny. From a man who woke up screaming in pain to a teenager who opened his eyes halfway to the cremation ground. These are the people who came back when no one expected it. Number 15. The nurse who knocked on her coffin. Bella Montoya was a retired nurse from Babahoyo. On Friday, June 9, 2023, the 76-year-old woman was rushed to the Martini Casa Public Hospital after showing signs of a stroke. Doctors tried to restart her heart and help her breathe, but nothing worked. A doctor eventually signed her death certificate. Her family took her body to a local funeral home, placed her in a coffin, and started the wake. It felt like the end. But a few hours later, something strange started to happen. About 5 hours into the vigil, people began to hear soft banging and a faint gasp coming from the coffin. At first, no one wanted to believe it. Then her son shouted for help. When they opened the lid, there she was, Bella, still alive, weak, and fighting for air. She was breathing in short, rough bursts, her chest moving unevenly. The crowd froze in shock, then scrambled to help. Paramedics rushed in and took her back to the same hospital. Bella was placed in intensive care and kept under close watch. Ecuador's health ministry quickly launched an investigation to find out how a death certificate could be signed while she was still alive. They promised to review how hospitals confirm death in the country and whether the doctors had followed every step. For a week, her condition stayed critical. Then, on Friday night, June 16th, the ministry announced she had passed away again, this time for real. The cause was an ischemic stroke, a blockage that stops blood from reaching the brain. Her remains were sent back to the same funeral home and buried in a public cemetery. Her family filed official complaints, asking for every name, every record, and a full explanation of what went wrong. What happened wasn't magic or some miracle. It was a mistake, a terrible one. Her heartbeat and breathing had become so faint that the doctors missed them the first time. Number 14. Breath on the coffin glass. In August of 2022, a 3-year-old girl named Camila Roxana Martinez Mendoza fell sick in San Luis Potosí, Mexico. She had stomach pain, vomiting, and a high fever. Her mother, Mary Jane Mendoza Peralta, first took her to a local pediatrician who warned that Camila was dehydrated and told them to head straight to the community hospital in Salinas de Hidalgo. At the hospital, the staff cooled the little girl with wet towels, gave her suppositories, and sent her home with oral rehydration packets and 30 drops of paracetamol. But nothing worked. Camila kept getting worse. So the family tried another doctor, and that night, they went back to the same hospital, desperate for help. Doctors put her on oxygen and connected her to a drip. But only minutes later, her mother was told that Camila had died. She says no electrocardiogram was done, no test to confirm her heart had really stopped. When she held her daughter, the child still hugged her weakly before the staff took her away. Soon after, hospital workers began the paperwork. The first death certificate listed the causes as acute diarrhea, severe dehydration, and hypovolemic shock, all signs of a body that has lost too much fluid too quickly. The next day, the family prepared a small coffin and set up a wake near Villa de Ramos. Everyone thought they were saying goodbye, but then something strange began to happen. The glass covering the coffin started to fog up. The kind of thing that happens when warm breath hits cold glass. Camila's grandmother stepped closer and saw her granddaughter's eyes move. She called for help. A nurse at the wake checked her and found a faint pulse. The family rushed to get an ambulance, and Camila was taken to a larger hospital in the state capital. For a moment, everyone believed she might make it. But by the time she arrived, her condition had collapsed again. Doctors tried everything, but they couldn't bring her back. When it was over, the family held 2 death certificates. The second listed cerebral edema and metabolic failure. Number 13. Speaking at her funeral. Peng Shuhua was 101 years old, a widow from Shenshuidong village in Lianjiang, Guangdong. About 10 days after a fall left her stuck in bed, her two daughters, both in their 70s, stayed by her side day and night. Late on January 19, 2013, they could no longer find a pulse or any sign of breath. They believed their mother was gone. The family called relatives, said their goodbyes, and began the funeral the next day at home. 16 hours had passed. The coffin was ready. Mourners had gathered, and everyone stood quietly, preparing for the final moment. Then, without warning, Peng moved. Her eyes opened. She looked around and spoke. For a second, nobody could move. Then neighbors and relatives rushed to the coffin. Her daughters lifted her out and checked her breathing. Shock turned to tears and laughter as people crowded around her. Reports from China said Peng greeted everyone calmly and asked why so many people were in her house. Later, she told a reporter she felt lucky to see how many people cared for her, and even luckier that she woke up before anyone took her to the crematorium. The funeral instantly turned into a feast. About 16 hours passed between the moment she was thought dead and the moment she woke up at her own funeral. Number 12. Little girl dies twice. In July of 2014, a 3-year-old girl from Aurora in Zamboanga del Sur came down with a high fever that just wouldn't break. Her parents rushed her to a nearby clinic on Friday, desperate for help. But by Saturday morning, the staff said there was no pulse. They declared her dead and released the body to the family. The next day, everyone gathered at the local church for her funeral. Relatives and neighbors filled the room, saying their prayers and preparing to say goodbye to the small child. It was supposed to be her final rest. But during the service, something that no one expected happened. A neighbor leaned over to adjust the little girl's body inside the coffin and saw her head move. For a split second, nobody moved. Then the room erupted in panic and disbelief. Family members lifted her out and realized she was breathing weakly. People fanned her, tried giving her a bit of water, and rushed her back to the same clinic. Police Senior Inspector Heidel Thielen, the local chief, later confirmed what happened and said his officers verified everything at the church in Barangay Bayabas. For a few precious hours, hope came flooding back. Maybe she was still alive after all. But by Monday, the tone of every headline changed. Doctors checked her again and found no vital signs. Reports from the province said she never fully recovered after leaving the church. She passed away soon after, and her parents began planning a second funeral. Number 11. From coffin to ICU. Brighton Damazanthi was 34 and lived in the Midlands city of Gweru, right in the heart of Zimbabwe. In mid-May of 2013, after battling a long illness, his family believed he had died at home. They began preparing a house funeral, and mourners filled the room to say their goodbyes. The coffin was open, and people walked by quietly to pay their respects. Among them was Brighton's employer, Lot Gaka, the man who ran the bus company where he worked. As Gaka stepped forward, he noticed something strange. Brighton's legs moved. The room erupted in shock. They checked for breath, for any sign of life, and found it. Relatives carried him out and rushed him to Gweru Provincial Hospital. At the hospital, doctors stabilized him and placed him on life support. He stayed under observation for about 2 days before his condition improved. Then, to everyone's relief, he was able to leave the hospital. Brighton's co-workers and family could hardly believe it. They had watched his health decline for months, so seeing him move again felt unreal. Later, when reporters asked him what he remembered, he said the story was best told by the people who had come to mourn him. He remembered being connected to machines, and then suddenly waking up in the coffin with nothing in between. Number 10. Chest moving at wake. In late October of 2017, 24-year-old Watson Franklin Mandujano Doroteo arrived at the contingency hospital in Tingo Maria, Peru, after days of fever and chills. It had all started after a simple root canal on October 21st. The pain and fever kept getting worse, and by the time he reached the hospital, his body was giving up. A few moments later, doctors told his family that he had died. Heartbroken, they brought him home and prepared an open casket wake. Friends and relatives filled the room, mourning quietly around the coffin. But as people stood by to say goodbye, someone noticed a tiny rise and fall in his chest. At first, nobody dared to believe it. Then, they leaned in closer and saw his lips move and his chest pull in another small breath. The room exploded in panic. Some shouted for help, others tried to comfort him, calling his name, keeping him calm, making sure he didn't stop breathing. A local doctor arrived and checked for a pulse, and there it was. Watson was alive. The family quickly lifted him out of the coffin and rushed him back to the hospital. Hours earlier, he had been referred from Aguaitia to Tingo Maria after that dental procedure, which had left him with a fever and chills. Now, after being declared dead, he was back on a stretcher, barely breathing, while relatives prayed that the hospital would save him this time. But by the time doctors examined him again in Tingo Maria, it was too late. They checked his vital signs and confirmed that this time he was truly gone. Watson was pronounced dead. Again. The family was devastated and furious. They accused the hospital of moving too fast the first time. They also believed the medicine given during his root canal played a role. It was diazepam, a sedative dentists use to calm patients, and they said it made him so deeply sedated that his breathing became too slow and faint to notice. Number 9. Peru mother knocks back. Rosa Isabel Cespedes Cayaca was 36 years old, and she was a mother of 3. On Monday, April 25, 2022, doctors in northern Peru declared her dead after a car crash on the Chiclayo-Fariñaf Road in Lambayeque. The crash had killed her brother-in-law and left her 3 children badly injured. Her family planned the funeral for the next day. On Tuesday, April 26th, the funeral procession reached the El Carmen Cemetery in the province of Fariñaf. Relatives carried Rosa's coffin toward the burial niche. Then, just as they were getting ready to say goodbye, people began to hear soft knocks coming from inside. The family froze. Then the knocks came again. They quickly lowered the coffin, opened the lid, and there she was. Rosa's eyes were open. There was sweat on her face. She was alive. Her family shouted for help, flagged down municipal security, and rushed her, still inside the coffin, to the nearest hospital in Fariñaf. Doctors checked her and found faint signs of life. They started oxygen and monitoring, hoping to stabilize her. But within hours, the readings began to fade. The doctors soon confirmed she had died again. Her family blamed the first hospital, the Lambayeque Regional Hospital, saying doctors had moved too fast, and that Rosa may have been in a deep coma when they issued the death certificate. Through it all, her 3 children, aged 5, 11, and 17, remained in treatment for injuries from the same accident. Number 8. The EMT error that cost a life. On August 23, 2020, 20-year-old Tamisha Beauchamp stopped breathing at her family's home in Southfield, Michigan. She had lived with cerebral palsy all her life. When her mother saw her go still, she called 911 right away. Paramedics arrived and worked on her for about 30 minutes, trying everything they could. Then they called an emergency room doctor by phone to report what they were seeing. Based on what the team described, the doctor declared Tamisha dead. The Oakland County Medical Examiner then released her body to the family without doing an autopsy. A funeral home was called to pick her up. The house went quiet. Everyone thought the worst part was over. But at the James H. Cole Home for Funerals in Detroit, the staff unzipped the body bag to begin their work. And froze. Tamisha's chest was moving. Her eyes were open. She was breathing. They stopped everything and immediately called 911. The workers later said they were only minutes away from starting the embalming process, which would have ended any chance to save her. Instead, they rushed her back out of the funeral home and straight to the hospital. Her family's attorney said she had been inside that body bag for about 2 hours. At Sinai Grace Hospital, doctors put Tamisha on a ventilator to help her breathe. Later, she was transferred to the Children's Hospital of Michigan for more advanced care, but she never woke up enough to talk. 2 months later, on October 18, 2020, she passed away. Her family's lawyer said the cause was massive brain damage from lack of oxygen during the time she was mistaken for dead. Michigan's regulators moved fast. The state suspended the licenses of 2 paramedics and started disciplinary action against 2 more EMTs who had been on the call. The city of Southfield placed the entire crew on leave and opened an internal review. Meanwhile, Tamisha's family filed a $50 million lawsuit, accusing the first responders of negligence. Eventually, the state allowed the medics to apply for reinstatement under certain agreements, while the lawsuit continued through appeals and long delays. Some officials suggested what's called Lazarus syndrome, a rare case where a person's heartbeat starts again after CPR stops. But the family and their lawyers rejected that idea completely. They said this wasn't a miracle or a mystery. It was a mistake, one that never should have happened. Number 7. Woke up screaming. On Tuesday, November 24, 2020, 32-year-old Peter Kiplangat Keegan suddenly collapsed at his home in Kericho County, Kenya. He had complained of severe stomach pain. His relatives rushed him to Kapkatet Sub-County Hospital, hoping doctors could save him. But by that evening, the family was told he had died. His body was sent straight to the mortuary. About 3 hours later, attendants began preparing his body for preservation. When they made a small cut on his right leg to inject formalin, the chemical used to stop a body from decaying, Keegan suddenly moved and screamed in pain. The attendants froze, then stopped everything. They rushed him back to the main hospital ward for emergency care, weak but breathing. Relatives later explained the timeline. They said they arrived at the hospital around 5:30 in the evening, were told at 7:45 that he was gone, and then learned around 10:30 that night that he was somehow still alive. The hospital gave a different version of events. Officials claimed the family had assumed he was dead and moved him to the morgue before a doctor had completed a formal certification. But the family insisted a nurse had already told them he had passed and even gave them the paperwork to take to the mortician. After being stabilized, he was admitted to the ward. For the next few days, his condition rose and fell. Then it took a sharp turn for the worse. He was transferred to Kericho County Referral Hospital for further treatment. On Thursday, December 3rd, doctors there pronounced him dead on arrival. County officials called for an investigation to find out exactly what went wrong. A local review eventually cleared the health workers of wrongdoing, but the entire event still left deep questions about how such a mistake could happen in the first place. Number 6. 2 hours in a body bag. On Saturday, February 4, 2023, an 82-year-old woman at Water's Edge Rehab and Nursing Center in Port Jefferson, Long Island, was pronounced dead at 11:15 in the morning. The staff began the usual process: paperwork, calls, and arrangements for transfer to a funeral home. By 1:30 that afternoon, her body was moved to a funeral home in Miller Place. Just 39 minutes later, at 2:09, workers noticed she was breathing. They immediately called for help, and she was rushed to a hospital for emergency care. At first, police didn't release her condition or her name. The story spread fast, especially because a nearly identical mistake in Iowa had made headlines only a few weeks earlier. Police later identified the location as O.B. Davis Funeral Homes. A year later, in 2024, the woman's family filed a lawsuit that publicly revealed her name, Janet V. Balducci. The complaint said she had spent roughly 2 hours zipped inside a body bag before funeral workers realized she was still alive. When they found a pulse, they called paramedics, and she was rushed to John T. Mather Memorial Hospital. She died there the next morning, at 5:20 on February 5th. The lawsuit also pointed to what may have been missed: deep vein thrombosis, dangerous blood clots in the legs that can break off and block blood flow. The family's lawyers claimed the nursing home failed to detect or treat it in time. Number 5. Woman wakes in morgue drawer. On Sunday, September 25, 2011, a woman named Rosa Maria Celestrino de Assis was brought by her family to the state hospital in Serra Coruna, Duque de Caxias, just outside Rio de Janeiro. She had pneumonia and signs of a stroke. Doctors ran several tests, noted that she had old stroke damage, and began treating her. But by early evening, her condition suddenly worsened. At 7:20 that night, the on-call doctor recorded her death. Her body was taken downstairs to the hospital morgue and placed inside a refrigerated drawer. About 2 hours later, around 10 o'clock, her daughter, Rosangela Celestrino, came in to identify the body. When the morgue workers slid the drawer open, Rosangela leaned in and felt her mother breathing. She screamed for help. The staff rushed in and pulled Rosa out of the drawer. They quickly took her back upstairs to the intensive care unit. The doctor who signed the certificate resigned, and several other staff members linked to the case were removed while the inquiry continued. After the morgue incident, Rosa stayed in intensive care. 2.5 weeks later, on Wednesday, October 12, 2011, the state reported that she had died. The final bulletin listed the causes as extensive acute bilateral ischemic stroke, severe community-acquired pneumonia, and septic shock. She never recovered enough to leave the ICU. Number 4. 3 days in the morgue. Lyudmila Stablitskaya was 61 and living in Tomsk, Siberia. Late in 2011, she began to feel unwell and was admitted to the Tomsk Regional Clinical Hospital. By Friday evening, doctors told her daughter Anastasia that Lyudmila had died. The family started planning the funeral for Monday. But when Anastasia came to collect the body that morning, the staff suddenly stopped the autopsy and said something no one expected. Lyudmila was alive. She had spent roughly 3 days inside the morgue's cold chamber and had woken up just before the examination began. The family had already paid for everything: the flowers, the coffin, the grave, and food for mourners. About 60,000 rubles in total. Later, Lyudmila told reporters she remembered being in the hospital on Friday and then waking up cold in the morgue on Monday, with her skin peeling from the chill. Lyudmila was a retired cook with heart problems. After she revived, the family took her home to rest. Then, unbelievably, it happened again. In October of 2012, during another hospital stay, Lyudmila suffered what her family called an apparent death. This time, doctors revived her after several hours. Number 3. Alive and kicking. On Wednesday night, February 26, 2014, 78-year-old Walter Snowball Williams was pronounced dead at his home in Lexington, Mississippi. The county coroner, Dexter Howard, checked for a pulse, found none, and recorded the time of death at about 9 that night. Williams was taken to Porter & Sons Funeral Home. In the early hours of Thursday morning, as funeral staff began preparing his body for embalming, the body bag started to move. The workers said he was kicking inside it. Paramedics rushed Walter back to the hospital. Within a few days, Walter's condition had stabilized enough for him to leave the hospital. Reports mentioned that he had been dealing with heart problems for some time. Experts suggested that his pacemaker may have briefly stopped and then restarted on its own, which could explain the missed pulse that night. 2 weeks later, the story came full circle. In the early hours of Thursday, March 13th, Walter Williams passed away again at his home in Lexington. Coroner Dexter Howard confirmed the time of death around 1 in the morning and listed natural causes. Number 2. The cut that woke the dead. In early September of 2007, 33-year-old Carlos Camejo was declared dead after a highway crash in Venezuela. He was taken straight to the morgue for a routine autopsy. When examiners made the first cut on his face, something shocking happened. Fresh blood began to flow from the wound, which should never happen with a body that's truly gone. They tried to close the cut, and that sudden sting jolted him awake. Later, Carlos told reporters he woke up because the pain was unbearable. The staff stopped everything immediately. Meanwhile, his wife arrived to identify his dead body, only to find him alive, sitting in a hospital corridor. In his pocket was the official autopsy order. Across his face was a fresh suture where the incision had been made. The crash happened near La Victoria in Aragua State, and the hospital involved was the General Hospital Antonio Maria Benitez. Number 1. Teen wakes before cremation. In February of 2017, 17-year-old Kumar Marawad from Managundi village in Dharwad, Karnataka, was fighting for his life. A month earlier, he'd been bitten by a stray dog. The bite led to a fast, dangerous infection. His fever shot up, and his breathing began to fail. Doctors in Dharwad put him on a ventilator and told his family that the infection had spread too far. Without life support, he wouldn't survive. After days of hoping for a miracle, the family made a heartbreaking decision. When doctors said there was nothing more they could do, they took him home